Hey guys, I'm Jess back at the last day of E3 2017. Peter Brown is joining me, and we've got Pete Hines here
Hello.
from Bethesda. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Bethesda is having a banger of a year this year. You have a lot of games coming
We
out.
do have a lot of games coming out.
Yeah, I mean, one of the major, I don't want to say complaints, but it's been a meme this year that a lot of the games coming out that have been shown off at E3 are coming out next year. But you guys kind of went the other way with that.
We decided this year for our showcase we really wanted to focus on 2017 and
Yeah.
all the stuff that we had going on. That's like, look, 6 months, like all of the stuff we're talking about is going to be out.
Yeah.
From stuff that's coming out in 2 weeks to next month to by the end of the year.
It worked for Fallout 4.
What's that?
It worked for Fallout 4.
Yeah, it did.
Yeah.
And we're big believers in sort of not only talking about things we're excited about, but being able to show them.
Yeah.
I tend not to like announcing a thing, but like I really can't give you a sense of it or show you what it's like. You know, we're either able to show gameplay or in most cases have people come by the booth and just play it. Like, you want to play Wolfenstein, come by and play it and try it and see what it's like, or VR or Quake or Morrowind or whatever.
Does the conversation of timing start with you, like start and end with you, and like, are the teams sort of responsible for that? Like, how do they feel if they're working on something and they can't show it?
Yeah, no, it's a full collaborative thing between myself. I'm one person on on a pretty big team that I have. So I've got folks on my team that are working with each of the studios on each of the games, and there's conversations around where are these things, what do we want to talk about, where do things land, and then you start to sort of set aside the stuff that's like, well, that's just not ready and that's not ready, and part of it also is coming from me and sort of figuring out kind of from a bigger picture what we want the story to be about, and net it out to what you guys saw this week.
Yeah. I mean, as Peter said with Fallout 4 and then Fallout Shelter last year, I mean, is that a sort of company-wide strategy or just preference that you don't like to have really long marketing lead time?
Yeah, I think it's more of a preference. I mean, every
Yeah.
game is going to be different in terms of from the time you know about it to when it comes out, but I tend to prefer a little shorter than longer.
Yeah.
But then, you look at some things like Elder Scrolls Legends, which we announced last year, but then it was in closed beta and then was open, didn't actually fully start releasing until March, and we're still putting platforms out. So it does kind of vary game to game based on what those needs are. But in general, yeah, I prefer shorter to longer.
I mean, I have identified that, which makes me comforted that when you do eventually announce Elder Scrolls 6, it'll probably be coming out soon. I won't have to wait too long.
Yeah, I don't
crossed.
I don't think in general we really want to do things anymore where it's, you start hearing about it 2 years beforehand. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I just tend to find it hard to kind of stick with and follow stuff, even the things that I'm interested in. I prefer to, like, I know about it and then I know when I'm going to play it, as opposed to like, when is that coming out again?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This year or next
the
year?
drip feed of info, just starts to sort of, oversaturate, what you're trying to think of for this game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I love to talk about VR because I think that's really fascinating. I have had so many conversations with people about, when the whole like VR in gaming, one of the most exciting things to me is how you really get immersed. And it's like, what worlds do I want to be immersed in? And a lot of them are yours.
Yep.
And we knew Fallout 4 was on the way, and then Skyrim came out of nowhere. When did the conversation start about bringing Skyrim to VR?
I don't remember specifically, but it is something that both Bethesda Game Studios and all of our studios have been looking at in terms of, like, what do we have and what do we want to do, and in both of those cases it was that they touched on a lot of the things that we would like to see in a VR game, right?
Yeah,
big and expansive,
absolutely.
and kind of go and do whatever you want, and tons of content in the case of Skyrim and Fallout 4, and having sort of an existing product allowed us to be able to do those things without them being a big distraction for what the studios are ultimately working on. In the case of Bethesda Game Studios, you mentioned TED 6 and everybody's asking about it, and we've said, well, they have 2 other big titles that they'd like to do before they get around to TED 6. Well, doing VR for these kind of experiences allows us to do things that we think are cool and fun without dedicating a big chunk of team resources. You can have a much smaller group focused on this while the team is working on those next big things.
Yeah. So am I right in saying that the entirety of both those games are playable in VR?
Everything that you know and could experience in Fallout 4 and Skyrim are in the VR version.
Wow. How have you guys like had conversations about how people might handle like being? I mean, these are hundreds and hundreds of hour games.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a thing that is already established. Like, oh, I'm going to stay home and play like 12 hours of VR games nonstop.
Yeah.
But if you're going to try, like, well, you can totally do it with this. And how folks choose to consume that, try it, how much of it they spend playing a game in VR versus in other ways, really kind of, it depends on the personal preference. You know, I had said before that I'm not entirely sure that everybody is just going to make this move from I do all of my gaming on VR only, and I still think that's true. But you know, I have heard from folks who say like, actually, that is what I've done.
Really?
Like, I have switched over to all of the stuff that I do is on VR only. So I think it really gets down to sort of those personal preferences and how you want to experience gaming. But if you're looking for immersion, like,
oh my gosh,
VR's certainly going to provide that.
On that line of thinking, what can we expect from the control options in VR? Like, say, on something like Vive. I'm sure you'll be using the Vive controller.
For sure.
And stuff.
Yeah, and the teams are still working on sort of which one is the default control system and whether or not there might be other ones that they support or allow for people like, well, I prefer this versus that within each game, that there might be more than one. But a lot of that is still kind of in progress, testing and figuring out what feels good and feels naturally, particularly for a game where you've got hundreds of hours. Like, well, if you could play it for 100 hours, it better feel good for hundreds of hours. So
I would have to imagine you have to determine if that's even possible before you sign off and start the project in earnest, right?
Yeah, and one of the things you can see here that I think is cool, and I've been getting feedback from folks with playing the Skyrim, is that things like dual wielding feels very differently in VR, that when you dual wield in Skyrim on another platform and you press a button or two buttons, that you're shooting straight ahead at essentially one thing.
Yeah.
But the way VR works, like, well, you can point a hand at one thing and you can point a hand at another, or you could be swinging something over here while shooting a cone of flame at something else. So that does offer us some more kind of flexibility in terms of how you think about targeting. Like, well, it's not just the thing in the center of the screen, it's actually wherever you decide to swing or aim.
And that's a pretty good incentive for someone who is really familiar with these games already.
Yeah, for sure.
Back in,
and in Fallout 4, settlements have become a really big thing. Folks love kind of building and customizing how that works, how easy it is to move things around, drop things down, rearrange your. Again, in VR is a very different, more simplified in a lot of ways than doing it before, where you're kind of going back and forth through a bunch of menus. So now I need a couch, and now I need this, and you're going through a lot of menus. In VR, it tends to be a much more quicker, tactile experience.
I assume that's been just a huge process for both teams to figure out how to take, because they're quite complicated RPGs as well, how to take all the elements from a game that you have on a console screen.
It's the UI part, right? Like, we don't have to figure out the quests this time around or all of that. It's the, like, how is a person going to interact? If you used to press the Y or the square button to do this, like, what are you now doing to do that in a VR game? Something as simple as the Pip-Boy, like, well, since it's on your arm, you should just be able to do this, and your Pip-Boy's there. Like, oh yeah, we should just totally do that. So if you want to look at your Pip-Boy, you just pull your arm up, and it's mounted right there on your forearm to interact with, and you put it down when you're done with it.
Yeah.
I could almost imagine how you could do that with any controller that has motion sensing in it. So even if you were playing on a controller that, maybe you could do that as well. Obviously not staring at your arm, but staring at the TV. So basically wonder, are there lessons that are being learned in redeveloping these games for VR that might be applied to future games?
For sure.
outside?
I mean, one thing that I've learned in my years at Bethesda is that every iteration a dev team gets on a particular platform, whether that's an Xbox or a Sony or VR or whatever it is, gives them so much more information when they go to do the next project or the next thing, because, like, oh, we learned some lessons about, like, how to take better advantage of this or how to do that, or we had this thing we wanted to do and it wasn't a really good fit for this game, but for the next one, like, we can kind of purpose build that from the ground up to take advantage of that. So I think that's not just true of us. I think all of these developers that are making great stuff for VR, as they get experience doing it and they get that player feedback, which is so important. It's one thing to have somebody comment on a thing that they haven't really played or experienced, but when you actually get that out into the wild and players provide feedback, that's where the really important information comes from to be able
Right.
to address and say, okay, next time around we need to do this, we need to take this into account. They didn't like this, but they love this.
Yeah.
How do we account for that?
How's that been on the show floor? Are the reactions you're getting playing into the way you're developing the games right now?
What we're getting is a lot more of what we've already been getting through
Right.
play testing, and
Yeah.
we had the testing lab and folks trying stuff. But it's been really fun to see folks getting to experience it. You sort of have your own notions about what you're making, but to either see those assumptions reinforced or potentially challenged or
Right.
whatever it is when you put it hands-on for press and for fans has been really fun. But
Yeah.
it's been also great to see like how much all three of them are getting, because when folks come to the booth, like we have all three of them running in each of our
Yeah,
rooms, so
I
you can just
saw.
decide like, well, which one do you want to
That's so
try?
cool.
And it's been this really healthy spread of like Fallout 4, no Skyrim, no Doom. Like everybody
Yeah.
has their own preferences of like the thing they want to try.
Good
And
consumer research right there.
yeah,
Yeah,
try
it's
and see. Like
great.
it hasn't been like, oh, it's 90% Skyrim or 90% Fallout. It's been pretty evenly split across all three.
Yeah, personally, I think it's just really exciting. Like, I mean, obviously there are a lot of indie devs who are very passionate about VR, getting into it, building those experience. But to see a company as big as you guys getting so solidly behind VR is, I think, something not everybody would have expected, but is really fantastic. I mean, do you personally see VR being like quite a concrete future in what gaming is going to become?
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to be the kind of thing that we've seen in the past, and I think we're seeing a little bit of a reaction to that now. This is just my personal opinion, but I think in the
Right.
past when you see like a Microsoft or a Sony says, here's our next big platform. You've been
Yeah.
playing on the PS3, here's the PS4. The adoption rate for those things looks like this, right? It goes straight up. Like you go from 0 people to tens of millions of people almost overnight. In the case of VR, you're not seeing that same kind of spike. It's going to be a slow, gradual thing that people continue to do, and Sony's now continue to grow their audience, and Microsoft has talked about maybe some of the stuff that they're going to do with their new console starting next year. But it's going to continue to grow on the PC, on all these other platforms at a more gradual rate. But it's still
Yeah.
something that we think ultimately is going to be important and is going to be fun, and something that people are going to want to
Yeah.
have and play, and we want to provide the kinds of experiences that we enjoy on those platforms.
I mean, as Peter said, like this stuff just hasn't been done. Like, it's impossible to like do this kind of research. So to actually put these games out there, see how people deal with them, see how they respond, how long do people want to be in VR, how's motion sickness playing out like on a grand scale,
Yep.
like how is everyone dealing with it? I feel like this is going to be really important
For sure,
for
and it's a
everybody.
great opportunity for us because truthfully, there's no universe in which we would start from scratch and build a VR-only version of, say, a Fallout 4. Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't make
It's
sense.
just massive, and it doesn't make
Yeah.
sense. But if you can take something that exists and bring it out and provide a really good experience on that platform and see what it's like, it does inform and help you learn an awful lot, so that down the road you're incorporating that into what you're doing. And as I said, it's something all of our studios are looking at. We don't really do like mandates, like
Yeah.
you have to have a mobile game, you
Yeah.
have to do a VR title, but it's more making the tools and the info available, letting them have those conversations with the platform holders to figure out what, if anything, they want to do or what makes sense for what they're working on. I think you're seeing the first few things, and we're going to continue to explore it and develop more games for it as we go forward.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to go back to the general conference for a second. What were you most excited about getting to debut or show off at the
Well, the
Bethesda?
thing I was most excited about was the part where it was over, because it's really stressful and nerve-wracking
bet.
to put together. So the part where it was done and I didn't massively screw up was good. I think we were really excited about Wolf and Evil Within, because those
Yeah.
guys have been working for years and years on those things under wrap. And if you've ever developed a video game and not been able to answer the question of like, so what are you working on for
Right.
literally years at a time, like
Yeah.
it's restricting, it's confining, and so to finally be able to put those things out and see people react to them so positively was a lot of fun. But honestly, the other thing for me was just like, in addition to talking about things that were just this year, was the pace of it. That was a big
Yeah.
thing for me, is I really wanted it to kind of move along. We've done different things. Todd, obviously, 2 years ago did a really full, intensive thing for Fallout 4. We've
Yeah.
done longer things for some games like Dishonored 2. We've done shorter things. And this year we just felt like, because we had so much hands-on, we really wanted to move along and sort of have it at a pace where you understand what's going on, but then we're able to to show more of the game as we go
Yeah.
along. You can come by and play it. That was kind of the biggest thing for me, is to execute on that idea.
Yeah, I'm certainly not buttering you up, but I swear to God, you guys have maybe the strongest lineup out of any publisher out there.
Very exciting.
Is that pretty much apparent to you guys already?
Absolutely not.
No?
No,
Really?
Look, this is what I do for a living. I walk around in a constant state of paranoia.
Yeah,
Does anybody care about what we're doing? Is anybody going to buy this?
Well, if you could attribute what I'm describing anyway, the way I see it, and I think a lot of people do see it, as Bethesda just being a very strong and consistent publisher, what would you attribute that to?
I mean, it's hard for me to. It's the only place I've ever worked inside the industry.
So you're the common denominator.
I'd like to say it's me. It's not me. It's not me at all. It might, in fact, be in spite of me. I think it probably comes, if you look back at our roots and kind of where Bethesda started 30 years ago now. Bethesda was a small mom and pop developer that just happened to publish their own stuff just for PC. And when I got there in '99, it was just the starting point at which ZeniMax had acquired Bethesda, and was starting the process of, like, you guys think too small, you need to think bigger, we need to kind of grow, and not grow like we're not trying to be Ubi, EA, Activision. Relatively speaking, we have 1,500 odd people around the world. We don't have 10,000, 12,000, 20,000 people. But we like to make games that kind of resonate with us, the kinds of things that we want to play. We're going to focus on a small number of them. Now, this year it kind of feels like we have an awful lot going on, relatively speaking, but we don't do 12 big releases a year. We tend to focus on a smaller number of things and try and execute those to a high level, and then take those learnings and take them to the next thing. So that's how we ended up working with studios like Arcane and id.
Right.
Those conversations started not with like, hey, we want to acquire you, but it was, we want to work with you guys and we think what you do is cool. And they eventually evolved into conversations of, well, maybe it makes more sense for you guys to just join us, or maybe it makes more sense for us to join you. But it didn't start off that way. It started off with, we like the kind of stuff that you make. It's the kind of stuff that we enjoy playing, and it shares a DNA with us, so that, a game like Evil Within, it's not necessarily something you'd associate with Bethesda, because it's not like we're a household name in survival horror and have been for 30 years. But Shinji and his team at Tango share some common ideas in terms of immersiveness, or kind of taking where survival horror was headed and taking it back almost to the roots when Shinji started that genre of, no, it's supposed to be about scarcity of resources and keeping the player off balance and sort of struggling to survive, as opposed to, I have lots of guns and ammo and I'm just going to mow my way through a problem. Those kinds of ideals resonate well with us. And, we hope every time we do something, it's always a hope of, I hope people like this. I hope people, we like to think we know what we're doing, but I don't think we walk around with a lot of hubris to say, no, everybody's going to love this. I mean, Skyrim, like, I remember thinking, like, I really love this, but I hope everybody else does too. And we launched that game, like, we didn't know, like, how well is this going to go over? Like, we think it's really great, but, talking about putting in the hands of consumers, like, even if you let everybody in the booth play it, it's very different than letting anybody in the world play it and seeing what they think. So we always, we try and sort of come from a place of strength and confidence, and do what we think we do well.
I mean, you guys have such a dedicated fan base. Like, I know a lot of people in this room just bloody love Bethesda, and I'm not sure every publisher can really say that. I mean, does that evoke a sense of sort of like comfort for the teams?
No.
Like, there's no comfort?
Nope.
Oh no.
Honestly, like, it's success is great, and having people like you is wonderful. But I mean, let's be honest, like, this is an industry of what have you done for me lately, and you certainly get amount of credit for things you've done in the past, but there's always that sense of, but what's the next one going to be, and how good is the next thing you're going to do? You're judged on the next thing that you're gonna do, and so we try as best we can to sort of live up to those expectations and stay very humble in our approach, knowing that, like, we don't just get to, like, stumble and roll out a piece of garbage that everybody's going to hate and then we just get forgiven. Like, we have to continue to deliver. We have to continue to push ourselves and be the kind of developer and publisher that people expect us to be, or that tide is going to change real quick.
I mean, it's crazy that any game is ever finished and shipped, let alone ones that are consistently impressive.
Yep, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know, like, this is just us being greedy at this point because you're giving us so many titles this year. But are you able to speak to anything that's past 2017 for Bethesda?
There's some really cool stuff coming down the road that I've
Yeah?
seen, that I've gotten to play, that I've
Cool stuff.
gotten to.
Well,
But
we're very excited.
yeah, we're not
Yeah.
ready yet to
And
talk about down the road.
aside from that, I just Elder Scrolls 6 is coming, right? Like it'll
Elder
come.
Scrolls 6 will eventually be made, but it is multiple big releases down the plan for those folks. They felt like they wanted to work on some other stuff and do some other things, and quite honestly, like they didn't want to be a developer that was just Elder Scrolls Fallout for the rest of their development careers. And you've got a lot of people in that studio who have been there
That's
a
fair.
really long time, and they wanted to be able to sort of self-determine what things they worked on next, whether it was existing stuff, whether it was new IP, and I think Todd and his team have earned the right, given the quality of this stuff, to be able to say, look, we know that everybody really wants Elder Scrolls 6, but we as creative people want to be able to do stuff that we're really passionate about. And I think once you see sort of how the next two titles come out and then how Elder Scrolls 6 kind of ties into what those games are doing and about, I think it'll all make sense. But I think it's going to be a while before all of those things happen.
But what you just said leads me to another question, though.
Okay.
Is there any credence to the concept that Elder Scrolls and Fallout are somehow a part of one timeline, very far apart?
I haven't the foggiest notion how anybody could make the leap that they are, in fact, part of the same thing. Well,
It's a
we
big
made
theory.
Elder Scrolls, and a completely different developer and publisher came up with Fallout, which we then acquired. So how did they do a...
I mean, these things can be decided after the fact. They don't have to originate.
No, I don't think there's any universe in which those universes are in the same universe.
So I didn't come up with that. But
Oh no,
it's
I know
just-
you
it's-
didn't.
right, okay.
I've seen the,
Okay.
Yes.
and
Right.
most of the time I just look at those questions very quizzically. Like, I don't understand how you made, but I don't know whether it's those people don't understand. Like, no, Fallout 1 and
Right.
Fallout 2 were made by
Right.
other people,
Sure.
and then we acquired it and made the third one. But the first two and what those games are about and the universe they set up, we adopted. We didn't.
Most people just think about, when they think of Fallout now, they really just identify with 3 and 4. So I think
Sure,
that
because
might
in the
be where
modern
they're-
era, I mean,
right.
that's
I
fine,
think that's
but-
where their head is set at. But I just wanted to make sure I got
But
the
old
question
guys
out
like
there,
me
so you
remember
can tell
the first
them.
one coming out, and we remember Wasteland before
understand.
that
Yeah,
one,
yeah.
and that's
No,
what. That's not a thing.
That's good for everybody
to
to know. Something that is a thing I would love to talk about is Creation Club. You spoke about it a little bit. There's been some kind of ruminating from people online. You know, what exactly is it? Is it a Paid's Mods 2.0? Some people are worried about. I mean, what can you tell us about that and the credit system?
So Creation Club was a new thing that the team came up with to say we want to continue to make and do stuff for Skyrim and Fallout 4, and we want to create an ecosystem that works across both games, but we want to leave mods the way that they are, and we don't want to change how that works. And we want to actually be able to not only do some of this ourselves, but to also bring in external developers, or even bring in people who are known for making mods, but not bring them in as modders, like bring them in as, now you're a game developer, like you're working with us, not on a mod. Whatever we greenlight that you make has to meet certain criteria. It can't be something that you've already created that you say, well, now I want to take this and offer it through Creation Club, because that's not what Creation Club is about. But it's almost like, they're almost like mini DLCs in some way, although that's probably not even a great point of reference, but they are internally created or internally created along with external developers. They're fully internally developed and work the same across all 3 platforms. They're guaranteed to work with your save games. They don't turn off achievements or trophies, unlike mods. They're guaranteed to work with all DLC. They'll be localized as needed. They will be put out and created as official content from the studio. But just like there's art in our games that people outside the game studio make, like we need a bunch of flower pots. Like we don't just make flower pots all day, and like they focus on the bigger stuff and they'll outsource flower pots to somebody else to make. This is in some ways a lot like that. It's all official content. We don't have any issues with platforms like, well, what kind of things are you or are you not allowed to include in what you do, because it's coming from us. It's QA'd by us. It's managed by us as official content and then put up and made available.
And you're yet to clarify pricing on that one, isn't that
Yeah,
correct?
it's not meant to be I mean, ultimately we'll see the stuff that comes up with, but it's not meant to be like high price point stuff.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be small little things that you can add to your game. The price points will vary. We'll
Yeah.
kind of figure that out as we
Yeah.
go along. Honestly, it's all dependent on what the folks who are working on this want to create. Like
Yeah.
they get to pitch like, okay, I want to make this thing, I want to make that thing, and then it gets approved and they start working on it.
Yeah.
And again, like if they're a modder that's been accepted, they're no longer a modder. They're now a game developer. As soon as they get greenlit, like they're getting paid like any other developer that works on our stuff.
Right. Well, that's awesome. I mean, thank you so much for sharing all of
Sure.
that with us. I wish we had like another half hour to talk because we definitely could. Yeah, I mean, it's great to see everything that's coming this year. I mean, I know everyone's excited to have some massive games to play. I will sit tight for Elder Scrolls 6. I can handle that because you'll definitely be bringing more great
Hopefully
games
we'll come
between
up with
now
some
and then.
games between now and then that
I feel like you can
bide your time.
probably handle that for me.
I hope
so
so.
that's all right. But thank you so much for taking the time to
Absolutely.
come and talk to us.
Thank you guys for having me on.
Thanks, Peter. And we will be back shortly.